And then our last story, which I'm actually super kind of excited about. This is my favorite story, I think, from this version of the cryptocurrent. Which, by the way, please subscribe to our newsletter online, and you can find also physical copies and download some for yourself if you like to stay up to date with fintech and DeFi news. But Circle has announced the ARC blockchain, which is very, very interesting. So it is in L1, that's layer one, which means it is the base operating blockchain ledger, distributed ledger part of this environment that Circle is creating. And what is unique about it, instead of it just being token oriented or even just Circle based, it is bringing together the world's behemoths, essentially, of finance, and creating an integrated intracultural, token system, tokenomic system, an economic system on chain. So we're talking about Visa, Ledger, BlackRock, AWS, Goldman Sachs, and more. It's designed to specifically meet the needs of the developers and companies / enterprises who are hosting economic activity on chain, right? So it's supposed to kind of be that first step out as a institutional bridge, right? Kind of created with them in mind, as opposed to, the cyberpunk builders, what I mean, trying to build for the institutions. It's kind of them, doing it in the adverse, which I think is the most exciting principle besides all the people being involved already. And the launch arrives with a lot of engagement, collaborations. There, again, are more than 100 companies so far down to be on it. And they will continue to, deploy and ask other enterprises to deploy, test, and build. And you can currently do that right now. It is live. But yeah, they calling this the EOS, the Economic Operating System. So again, here we are, right? Like we kind of heard on the culture. I'm sure by this time next year, right, we're going to see booths and speakers who have tech stacks for the EOS. You know what I mean? And we'll start seeing new financial products for that. So super exciting to me. But what do you think about that?
This story is actually incredibly fascinating because, again, if you kind of take your mind back a few years, when we were talking about digital assets and, people weren't talking about stable coins as much, people were talking about distributed ledger technology.
Yeah.
Right? That was what the time we were using then. There was probably two kind of core challenges for that technologies to get into mainstream adoption, right? The first was just a lack of regulatory clarity. There was a kind of piecemeal approach globally. There was, countries like China had, all but banned it. And then in other markets, there was no clarity at all. And then the second thing, I think, was actually questions around the infrastructure, the blockchain layers in which these new kind of financial systems would be built on.
Right.
Right. Is Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of these, they were, obviously there's lots of promise around them, but were they actually ready and did they have the capability to offer the services at the scale we're used to with companies like, say, Swift, the Swift network, or the card networks, right? So this L1 story from Circle is fascinating to me because, again, a few months ago, if you remember, Stripe announced Tempo,
yes,
which in itself is another L1
yes.
protocol. So I think this is probably the biggest kind of, to me, testament of the kind of institutional adoption of blockchain and digital assets, because now I think we've gone from these institutions thinking about specific products and use cases, i.e. stablecoins for payouts, for on-ramping and off-ramping, towards actually thinking about a step back and the underlying technology to build entire economic and payment rails on top of it.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, the most interesting piece, the fact that like now a company like Circle, right, which is the most dominant stablecoin issuer when it comes to the kind of regulated space. I know Tether is incredibly dominant, but it's a different story.
Controversy
right?
there, yeah,
it's a
right,
different story. But like Circle, obviously, it's gone public as up 400% since its IPO.
Yep.
And now that it's moving into building a layer one kind of blockchain infrastructure, tells you they're actually focused solely or critically on the enterprise level, and I think that's going to be what you need for mass adoption and mass kind of integration of this payment technology for the future, right? You need that buy-in from the enterprise.
Well, because this is how you get terms like distributed ledger to disappear, right? Mm-hmm. And this is how you get to a debit card where you don't realize, again, that a thing like a rails, are even things, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is how you get to build the wall that hides, what's happening else. So that's, and that is exciting. I think for me, right, being within the sector, right, there is obviously a ethical type of quandary, conflict going on, right, where it's like, well, too much adoption, obviously, now you don't no longer have the alternative, or the counterculture to it, right? But the other side of me that is excited about it is, as you stated and seamlessly went into, adoption is based on comprehension, right? If it is focused on being comprehended at the highest levels, then obviously we know that education and everything else is just going to trickle down naturally.
But I think I just want to, the point I would make too, right, is the cryptocurrency industry as a whole struggled for a really long time because the promise was incredible, but actually the cost of it was too much. In my personal opinion is that the cost of it felt like it was far too great, right? Like lots of, compliance issues, lots of,
fraud, all
pretty
this. Yeah,
nefarious
for
activities
sure.
going on. And at the end of the day, money is an incredibly, whether we like it or not, money is an incredibly important part of individuals' lives. It's very personal. It's, deeply entrenched in everything we do. And so actually having regulatory clarity, having the things to protect consumers so that their money is their money, so that they're not going to end up in a terrible financial situation.
Or make mistakes that they can't come back from.
And have not have the guardrails to protect them. I think that's not something we should be looking forward to at all, right? So I think there's, companies like Circle, companies like Coinbase that we touched on at the beginning, you have to give them a huge amount of credit for the fact that where there was there wasn't that push to force themselves to be so compliant, to go above and beyond, to kind of actually make sure that this space was, the promises was there without as much of the risks. I think that's a really, that's something that we should really congratulate them on.
Yeah.
And I think we're moving into a direction in which the industry as a whole is, the crypto side of that industry is learning, I think, an important lesson from TradFi, which is the compliance piece, which is the safety security piece. And I think we shouldn't forget that if we want to make, blockchain and these new payment rails as successful as we want them to be.
Yeah, it's a maturation process for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.